Some of the best innovation in the industry is happening in the field of materials and the science behind the substances we use to build products. Here to share the future materials of home is Dr. Andrew Dent, Executive Vice President of Materials Research at Material ConneXion and Chief Materials Scientist at Sandow. After working in academia at Cambridge University, he consulted for Rolls-Royce, the US Navy, NASA, and the British Ministry of Defense. And he's the co-author of the book Material Innovation. We're going to hear from Andrew about recent material developments that consider a new approach to home, where safety and functionality have become so important. I personally think we're due for a bit of a goatskin renaissance, but sadly, no one seems to feel the same way. Join me in welcoming Andrew Dent.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the time spent here. For the next 20 minutes, I'm going to be talking to you about the future materials of home. Over this period, I'm going to kind of go through what we're seeing in terms of new materials and new treatments as regards surfaces within the home. Obviously, we've been through an unprecedented change within our homes, and this has resulted in different needs, different desires regarding the surfaces, the materials that we're using. I'm going to go through basically 5 different areas. I'm going to introduce my company, also go through Antiviral 101. What does it mean when we talk about antiviral materials or products? Talk about inherent antimicrobial antiviral properties and materials. Also look at some new materials and treatments for both soft and hard surfaces. And also, how does cleaning affect surfaces? How do we, now that we have much more rigorous cleaning processes, how does that affect the materials that we're using? And also, I'd like to close with a more thoughtful outlook on materials' future. Okay, the reason why I'm talking to you here is because I've spent the last 20 years focusing on material innovation from a range of different industries. We deal with home interiors, but also architecture, footwear, sportswear, sports equipment. We do a lot on home appliances, consumer electronics, packaging. So we have a very unique approach to materials. We look very much about their performance and properties, but understand them from a range of different industries and areas. I run a library here in New York City, but also in locations around the world that help our clients access samples to those materials and information as well. Okay, so let's talk about antiviral. Obviously, we've been very concerned about this over the last few months, and I'd like to continue that, potentially over the next few months and into years. Well, there is a slight difference between antiviral and other more well-known terms, such as antibacterial, antimicrobial. We know these are the 3 main areas that we need to be concerned about: viruses, bacteria, and also mold spores. But what do the actual terms mean? Antibacterial is kind of the baseline. It's basically trying to kill or reduce or retard bacteria. Antimicrobial is a little step beyond that. It's including bacteria, but also other microbes such as fungi and mold. Antiviral is a very different thing, and the way you kill viruses is also different, because unfortunately, viruses have this fatty layer on the outside that means they're a little harder to kill. So the technologies that we've been using for antibacterial and antimicrobial don't necessarily always kill antivirals. So it's worth knowing the difference between those. You're probably aware that there are some inherent antimicrobial antiviral materials. We've heard a lot of materials such as copper. And just be aware that when we talk about copper and its antibacterial and also antiviral properties, that also includes anything that contains mostly copper as well. So things like brass and also nickel, silver. So we don't just have to have pure copper in order to have those performance and properties. Well-known ones as well, of course, silver being one of the main ones and used an awful lot in products for the home. Zinc also, perhaps less so. Gold, yes, also an antiviral, but of course, they're concerned about in terms of the use of the cost of that material, so therefore it is usable, but not typically an awful lot. And it's worth actually mentioning, though, that in home products, whenever you're using products that are brass or copper or silver, make sure that they're not actually coated, because the majority of hardware, things such as handles, doorknobs, drawer pulls, those sorts of things, they look brass, they might look copper, they might even look silver, but they're typically coated with a polymer coating, an acrylic or something like that, which therefore means any of the antiviral properties are lost, because you've therefore got a protective layer between the actual metal and the material that you're touching. So just be aware of that. We've also seen, because some of the metallic inherent antimicrobials and antivirals, they are biocides. What that means is that if you've ever seen the runoff of a silver or copper mine, nothing grows. So silver and copper, they kill bacteria, they kill microbes, but they also kill everything else as well. So silver does have that ability to kill microbes and also the good bacteria. So as a result, we're trying to avoid too much use of these types of materials because, unfortunately, if they get into the water stream, they can then cause challenge. They can then start killing off ecosystems. So although we find them very effective at killing viruses and bacteria, we've often found with our clients, we try and get them to use them in only certain areas, making sure they're only in high-touch areas. Rather than blanketing the whole world with silver, we want to make sure that we're using it in areas that really are impactful. Having said that, there are some inherent antimicrobial materials that are more plant-based. Wasabi, green tea, mint, all of these have properties. They don't kill every type of bacteria and every type of virus, but they do kill some. And we've certainly seen more products using these types of less harsh antimicrobials as a way of sort of reducing bacteria and microbes without necessarily killing everything in its path. So what are the new treatments for soft and hard surfaces? We've seen a range of different new technologies which are trying to provide that cleaning property. This one I love, Toucan Eco, simply because it's just using salt. You know, we know about the quaternary ammonium, we know about bleach, we know about the basic disinfectants. The challenge with those stuff is that they tend to be really quite harsh and harmful. This is simply just activated salt. You put salt water, you ionize it in this little container, and what happens is it basically acts as a very effective antiviral and antibacterial killer that really after a few hours, when it's done its killing, it then loses any efficacy. So afterwards, you just ended up with basically just a salt and water solution. So the advantage of it is that it kills when it needs to, and then basically dissipates and loses its effectiveness, therefore becoming a lot more benign as a surface. Geomagic was another recent one, and the advantage of this one, of course, is that it keeps working. Bleach will work immediately, but then it's under light and heat, basically stops working. So after you've initially cleaned that surface, within a few minutes afterwards, if there's sunlight there, the bleach effect is gone. So therefore you need to, if you want something which lasts a little longer, then Geomagic is actually a solution which enables you to do this. What it does is it kills initially and then leaves certain microspheres on that surface. So if you touch it again, let's say 2 hours, 6 hours, 2 days later, the effectiveness is it works again. So every time that surface is impacted by a human or by something else, then the antiviral, antibacterial process works again. We've also seen a range of antiviral treatments for fabrics. Now, we've seen them obviously for PPE. They've been selling like hotcakes the ability to not just protect against, in terms of just stopping moisture from coming out or in within a mask, actually killing viruses and bacteria. Albini Group has a product called Viro Formula, which is actually an apparel fabric, but they're also selling it for upholstery, which does kill viruses on contact. It withstands a number of washes, lasts for a number of years. So if you are really concerned about viruses, there are actually now fabrics out there that can do this through a multi-pronged approach. It kills bacteria, but also it kills viruses as well. We've also seen it on the hard surfaces. Now, this SANI concentrates is a very effective both bacteria, microbe, and also virus killer. It's using zinc. Remember, I noticed in the earlier talk about inherently antimicrobial and antiviral metals. Zinc was one of them. Zinc is not as powerful as silver, but this technology has enabled the product to put it very much on the surface. So even though it's incorporated into the plastic itself, so if you mold a piece, then it's always is inside the plastic, but also it's predominantly effective also on the surface. So if this plastic gets scratched, it's still effective. Using very small amounts of zinc, still effective at killing all of those different types of viruses and bacteria, and works as long as the product still exists. So it's continually working. So unlike something like a disinfectant, where once you've cleaned it, after a few minutes it's no longer working, this will work continually. We've also seen sort of biomimetic approaches to this type of technology, where nature has been very effective at being able to kill off certain types of bacteria. And what it's done, rather than using chemicals, which we're currently using through our use of the zinc and other metals, here they're actually using surface textures. It's a fact that certain surfaces, whether they are insect wings or even the surface of a shark, through the texture on that surface, it's possible to create a disruptive surface which bacteria and viruses don't want to live on. What they do is they simply create a very rough surface on a microscopic scale, which then means that the bacteria, once it lands on the surface, doesn't like to stay there. It basically falls off or moves on. So the surface itself has no chemicals. It doesn't kill the bacteria. What it does, it makes that surface inhospitable. So it means that even though you touch that surface and maybe your hands are contaminated, that bacteria simply won't want to exist on that surface. So the way nature does it, which is a much less harsh process, it doesn't use biocides, it simply uses just the surface texture. They're now applying that to, in this case, handles made out of aluminum. So the company is able to create very fine microscopic textures in order to make that surface very inhospitable and therefore reduce significantly the amount of bacteria and viruses that live on that surface. So how does cleaning affect surfaces? We've been talking to a lot of retail stores who have been saying, okay, we want to open up again. We want to make sure that we're being very obvious about our cleaning process. One client, a consumer electronics giant, is saying that we want to be cleaning probably between 10 and 30 times a day. So we're going to have people every day, every hour going on every surface and cleaning down that surface. So as a result, if they're using harsh cleaners, things like the bleaches, the diluted bleaches, and the quaternary ammonium, then that's going to cause an effect on those surfaces. So are there materials that are more resistant and less resistant? If you look at things such as most ceramics, actually all ceramics, will withstand these types of more harsher cleaning materials very effectively. Most metals do. Again, as I said, a lot of metals, though, are actually coated in things like polymers. So the typical brass surface will be coated in an acrylic or some other polymer. So it's also interesting to know that although brass might be able to survive this sort of cleaning, will the plastic itself? Stainless steel is fine. Because what stainless steel has a ceramic surface, a transparent ceramic surface on its surface, which protects it. So stainless steel, you're fine. But other metals can be a little bit more concerning. Aluminum, if just left exposed, can after a while actually start to reduce its luster as a result of this cleaning. It's also worth mentioning that different plastics respond in different ways to these cleaning chemicals. Polypropylene, it's fine. It survives most everything. But things such as polystyrene, ABS, and nylon, specifically ABS and nylon, don't do too well. You clean nylon or ABS repeatedly with a dilute bleach solution, eventually it's going to start discoloring. So you need to be thinking about that when you're considering using polymers, plastics in your home products. If it's going to be a high-touch surface, I want to start thinking more carefully about what material do I want to make it out of to make sure that if I am going to have to clean it multiple times, it's not going to start discoloring, start looking white, start cracking, and overall losing its performance. When it comes to cleaning soft surfaces like fabrics, coated versions, the vinyl, PVC, silicone, polyurethane, those types of materials, they've been tested heavily. Typically, they are used in applications that include marine, hospitals, prisons, fast food restaurants. So they're used to that really quite caustic cleaning process and are able to withstand it. With woven fabrics, it depends. Solution dye tend to last a lot better. Certainly there are more high-performance fabrics which are known to withstand this sort of thing. Some of the natural fabrics, you have to be a little more careful, but the assumption is that you're probably, if you're using a natural fabric, you're less likely to be using harsh chemicals, wanting to use perhaps chemicals such as the Toucan Eco, which is simply just a salt solution, which will be a lot less in terms of impact on that fabric surface. So, as I sort of wrap up, I want to kind of give a more thoughtful outlook. That first section was very much about, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're concerned about these types of bacteria and viruses, what can we do to protect, what are some of the materials we can use? But also, in talking to a lot of designers and talking to a lot of people who produce materials and products out there, also wanting to understand that we, in the last perhaps few months, we've become more thoughtful in our approaches to materials. We're less sort of just all concerned about performance. We're not interested now more about sort of perhaps more natural approaches, thinking more about beauty, perhaps more considered approaches to our material choices. So I want to go through a few ideas that perhaps are less concerned with the extreme levels of the pandemic and more interested about, okay, so and when we come out of this, are we going to have a more considered approach to the material choices that we have? Certainly, we've seen treatments on fabrics where we're trying to avoid chemicals. Plasma treatments, which are now being much more mainstream, are able to create water resistance, fire retardancy, simply through changing the physical structure of that fabric. Rather than putting a coating on top, we're now just changing the structure of the fibers, whether they're synthetic or natural, and making them water resistant, making sure that they have fire resistance, and avoiding that chemical addition. Silk proteins are now being used to create a silk-like feel on the surface of fabric. So instead of the concerns we have about the use of silk, it's always a little bit challenging because it's not necessarily such a high-performance material. We can use more high-performance natural materials and then literally apply silk proteins onto that surface to give it that silk-like feel. So the idea of avoiding high-performance treatments and looking to the material itself and the technological advances we can create within that material rather than applying chemicals. We started to see more interesting renewables. There's been a movement sort of rethinking cotton. Cotton's a very water and energy-intensive material. It's used ubiquitously, but what are the alternatives? We started to see cottonized hemp. Hemp is a material almost acts like a weed. It grows very effectively with little irrigation, and you can now use processes which create a much more fluffy, absorbent, cotton-like feel to this material. We've also seen a huge change in the way that materials such as rayon, viscose, those types of materials are used. They're regenerated cellulose, so they do come from originally from a renewable resource, whether it's cotton, whether it's wood, whether it's bamboo. But the new processes are also allowing these materials to be produced from waste materials. We can produce them from waste cellulose, whether it is cotton scraps, whether it is waste T-shirts, whether we can actually use them from agricultural waste as well. As long as there's cellulose in there, we can regenerate it into these fabrics. So rather than using virgin cotton, virgin wood, we can actually use agricultural waste to produce the equivalent quality of soft, absorbent material. Also seen a much more creative use of recycled content. The beautiful trays on the left-hand side are actually produced from waste broken up ceramics. So of all the pots that are out there, of the ones that break, there's an awful lot in post-industrial facilities. So they produce pots, they produce earthenware, they produce china. They get broken. Those chips get ground down, and this company from the Netherlands is actually able to fuse them back together again into these beautiful trays. It uses a special process which makes sure that the chips aren't too small, so it's not just dust, it's actually individual chips, but they're able to put them back together and fire them into one piece and create the designs you can see there. And of course, we have plenty of recycled paper. Here we're seeing wall panels produced using that recycled paper, printing onto them. They have wonderful absorptive properties, and of course the different shapes you're able to create gives you a very unique aesthetic. And also wellness. For a lot of our clients, wellness has been a very large trend. We've seen it out there in the media. How does it affect materials? We've started to see additions to our products and also our fabrics, which are proactive in providing wellness. The far infrared emission of minerals added into things such as bedding and also bed linens. The idea is it gives back far infrared radiation, which warms up the skin, promotes blood circulation, and also sort of gives greater skin health. The same with additions of things such as vitamins. We saw them probably a decade ago. We're now seeing them again. Addition of vitamin E, vitamin C, the idea being it's supposed to be immunity boosting. So adding these types of chemicals into the fabrics, whether they're apparel, but also for bed linens as well, the idea being proactively pushing these sort of vitamins onto the skin to improve immunity. So gave you a few ideas in terms of what we're seeing in terms of antimicrobial, antiviral, antibacterial. And of course, yes, we do need to be concerned about that. But my sort of, if an end thought, it's that we need to consider perhaps more thoughtful approaches to materials. If you are going to choose materials, be thoughtful about, do I actually need antibacterial? Do I need to worry about that? Can I just not clean the surface? Can I not make sure that I myself am clean and a virus-free before I interact with the surface? So have a more considered approach to materials. Don't always choose the most sort of antiviral, antibacterial. Be more considerate about the material choices. Use, if you can, materials where you know where they've come from. Have an understanding about their source, whether it is recycled materials, whether it's renewable, and also think about their end of life as well. As we're considering sustainability and the idea of circular economy, we're more interested in the idea of where can that material be used again? So it's been recycled, you're now using it. Where can we then potentially use it again after the end of that life? Thank you very much.